welcome. My name is Amareiske and today I will be doing my May wrap-up. People who have followed me have noticed that I have taken a break and it was a little bit longer than expected and planned. More than 2 weeks longer than I planned actually. But I am back and I'm ready to share some bookish opinions with you. So let's get started with my May wrap-up. The first book I finished in May was Scythe. I read like 95% of this in April actually, so it's a little bit of a long time ago that I read this. But I do have to say that I actually thoroughly enjoyed this book. It is not the best book I ever read, and I had a lot of thoughts. I thought about a lot of things, and I wonder if Neil Shusterman intended for me to think about all these things. Let me tell you a little bit about this book. It's I would call it a dystopian. It's supposed to be a utopian novel, but from the beginning on, it's clearly a dystopian society. The people have found the cures for all diseases, hunger, poverty, and that kind of stuff, but because of that they are all content and they just live. They do not enjoy, they do not have the feeling of euphoria or the gratitude for being healthy. They even have a name for jumping off of buildings or off of high heights and dying, but they call it deadish because they don't actually die because of it. They get revived no matter how bad their body breaks. And they call it splatting because of the splatter of blood, probably. Which is quite disturbing, but since the people have not got like really any chance to experience death either themselves or in their close-knit circle, except for the gleaning the scythes do, because that is the only way to die in this society, which is even more messed up, I think, because normally death is not in the hands of people, and they make death the only thing in human hands in this book. The rest is in the hands of the Thunderhead, the overarching sort of AI thing in here. And I thought this was good. I think I gave it like 4 stars. It made me think a lot, but also not necessarily about things that you were supposed to think of. Because at a certain point I thought, well, if the Thunderhead can just make new islands, where does the sand and the ground come from? And how does it not happen that the world floods for the rest? Because you have to get the ground from somewhere. But also, if you put up a lot of ground on the bottom of the sea until an island forms where people can live and farm and stuff, that water needs to go somewhere. So those kinds of scientific things I thought of, and I just thought of how disturbing it was that people accepted what they all have accepted in this world. All in all, I thought also, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I thought it was satisfying. And also that maybe I gave the book also 3 stars. I'm not exactly sure anymore since it's such a long time ago. I thought it was a decent book. The ending was satisfying, and I'm still not really out of the doubt if I want to read the sequel Thunderhead or not. So let's leave it at that. Then we get to my next read of the month, which is a DNF, which is Nixia by Scott Reinkin, or however you want to pronounce that, because I'm still not clear about how you pronounce it in an American way. Let me be clear, this book is not badly written, but I did DNF it because at a certain point, I don't know where exactly, yeah, page 100, around page 150, the author makes some statements that clearly show that he does not know how science works. He equates his character's knowledge about Nixia in the book, which is like a substance that can do almost anything, which the people in this book, the main characters, that fight against one another are supposed to go and farm on that faraway planet. They don't know how it does what it does exactly, and he compares that with vaccines and gasoline and some other things. And then I think, and electricity. But then I thought, when those things were implemented the way they are now, people did either have a very, 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 very clear and distinct idea of how it worked, or they did actually know how it worked and how the appliances and technologies work they were using. So you cannot compare this with one another. It's stated after that sometimes you have to take a risk, and that is true, but in science you never take a risk with something you have no fucking clue of how it works. So then I DNF'd, because the author showed he does not know how science works, and even though this is obviously not meant to be a scientifically accurate science fiction novel, the author still has to at least somewhat understand the scientific method and how it works and how stuff is implemented. So this book went. Also, I did not care a lot about the characters. I don't even know the name of the main character anymore. I believe it was Elliot, but I'm not sure. Well, I know the name on the back of the book is not the name of the main character, so let's just leave it at that. Actually, I read this sampler. It's obviously not meant to be a book. It's Behind the Throne by K.B. Wagers. It's a science fiction novel. This is the sampler of a science fiction novel that has come out quite a while already. I got it in a book box, and I was curious, and I thought that this small little sampler was fine, but it is not enticing me to read the rest of the novel, which is also fine, because that is why you would want to read a novel, to know if you want to read the rest or not. Know that the sampler does not end with the ending, but still the little part contained in it was satisfactory for me to know what this book is about, and the story felt not complete, but complete enough, so I could not even rate this, and I have no clue how I would rate it. I think 3 stars. It was nothing very special. The writing wasn't very special. It was very mediocre in the beginning. The characters were quite okay. Everything was just fine. Then I decided to I don't know if I fully read it anymore or if I just finished it, but The Secret Notebook of Sherlock Holmes, I think I completely read it, by Liz Hedgecock. This is a collection of short stories from Watson's perspective about some of the cases he and Sherlock Holmes solved that did not make it into full-blown novels. Obviously this is not written by the original author of Sherlock Holmes. I don't know for sure who that was, because I did not read the novels, but like, I enjoyed this. It is not very good, like, plot-wise. It's very poor, because you feel like the plot of a short story starts and ends. Some are not even 3 pages long, so you don't really get the build-up. But I thought it had very good characterization. Watson and Sherlock were funny. They had a very funny and hilarious and light-hearted dynamic. It's a very light-hearted read. It gave me a lot of joy. This was a 3 stars, and I totally recommend it, but don't expect too much from it plot-wise. But it does have a good atmosphere, and it does have funny, witty characters, so yeah. Then we got to another box book, which now is one of my all-time favorite. It's The Toy Makers by Robert Dinsdale. This is kind of a fairy tale like book that's about a girl who falls pregnant in the beginning of the 1900s, like 1906. Her mother discovers it and wants her not to abort the baby, but to let the baby go up for adoption, so the daughter can still marry. But the daughter doesn't want to give up her child, even though I believe she is 16 years old. So she runs away, and she ends up in Papa Jack's Magical Toy Emporium. It's actually called Papa Jack's Toy Emporium, but it's a magical toy shop, and our story starts there. We have a beautiful lyrical writing that feels like a fairy tale. It does not work for the entire part of the story. Like sometimes it's a little bit too much or too little for the situations. But I did not mind because I still loved it. This was a very high-end 4-star rating, but still an all-time favorite book and definitely worth a reread. I even tabbed it at places. I hardly ever tab or annotate my books, but this one I did because there is some beautiful quotes in here. Because at a certain point one of the main characters does end up going to World War I. This book takes place from 1906 until 1953, so it spans over World War I and World War II, and one of our characters becomes a World War I veteran, so he survives. Because this is a fairy tale, you would kind of expect it. I'm not going to tell you which character it is, but I think this book dealt very well, or at least well enough, with the PTSD that comes from a war veteran. How the character acted seemed legit. I have read comments on that, the two brothers in this book, because we have like a sort of fight between two brothers. They are kind of written like stereotypes or caricatures, and you could say that especially for Emil. That's the youngest brother. He is very stereotypical, almost a caricature. But the other brother, Kaspar, he seems a caricature in the beginning and later. He is, well, I'm going to tell you that he becomes the war veteran, but that is not important. Like, it seems like he acts like a caricature, but I think it's believable that someone who is highly traumatized and does not get proper treatment does act that way. Either the way the character acts in this book, which is completely drawn into his own world and not knowing how to deal with the trauma and the sadness that comes from it, or they become very, very violent and act in a very disruptive way. There's some, not violent, but the disruptive behaviors also happen in this book as well. I thought it was done very well. It led to some beautiful quotes. It led to some beautiful moments I could totally align with. I have seen some PTSD cases in my life as well, not because of war, but what happens with the other characters that stay at home. Yes, I absolutely know the feeling. And that was very, very well done. There was one character in here that I felt like was just there to pair one of the characters off, which was annoying, especially since the character is actually just a female and she's a bitch. So, yeah. But outside of that, it fit in the book, but it didn't need to be there. Like, it fit in the story, but it didn't need to be there. It's still a very good book and I still want to reread it. This is a Christmas read. It has a very Christmassy vibe, especially since the toy store opens at first snow and ends when the thaw sets in. But it actually takes place over the course of entire years. Of course, with a lot of time jumps, since it takes place over almost 50 years. It's a lot of fun. I totally recommend it. This one you should absolutely get if you choose one book. So, on to the next two books, which both are DNFs. Ooh. One is Het leven is verrukkelijk by Remco Kampert. This is a Dutch modern classic. I believe it was first published in the beginning of the 1960s, and I enjoyed it well enough. By the way, my pile of books fell. But I enjoyed it well enough, but just not good enough to finish it. Like, it was decent. It was a little bit boring. It's a slice of life, day out of the life of like 3 teenagers who find, aka steal, 100 florins or guldens, because that is the monetary currency we had in the Netherlands in 1960. This published in 1961, I believe. It's supposed to showcase the wild 60s, but that could not happen if it's published in 1961, right? Like, it was fine. And then we have an unpopular opinion, but I DNF Children of Blood and Bone at page 301 for the simple reason that I wanted to DNF this for a long time, but I knew that around halfway through the book there is a sort of twist or otherwise kind of well-known point in the story where something happens and the story takes actually up, like the plot becomes more action-packed and stuff. It's supposed to be action-packed from the beginning, and you can see that a lot of action happens. But what this book mostly suffered from, and especially at page 301 you can see it very well, is a lack of editing. Because there was a grammatical mistake with plurals and singulars in here that I could see, and like, it is something I needed to be able to do correctly when I was like 10 years old. Or at least needed to notice needed to be able to notice if I did it wrong. That is primary school here. 10 years old. This book contains a grammatical issue that a 10-year-old should be able to do right. So that is obvious that the editing is just off. Also, the plot should feel action-packed and fast-paced, and it is so slow. The character perspectives feel like they are one and the same voice to such an extent that we have 3 POVs, 2 female, 1 male, and as soon as the characters, we have Zayli, the main character, which is this girl, Amari the princess, and Inan the prince. And as soon as one of the 2 royals' perspective gets together with Zayli, I constantly think I'm reading her perspective, even if 2 sentences above it is clearly stated that it is the other person's perspective. That is not good writing. The voices are not distinct at all. Only way I saw that it was not Zayli is that her name is mentioned instead of I. So, like, or that she does something instead of I do something. Like, that is not the way how you should distinguish perspectives. That's ridiculous. So I didn't like it, and when that grammatical mistake happened and I already had wanted to DNF this for 100 pages or something, I thought, this is not even worth to keep a bookmark in, because usually that is what I do with books I DNF, because sometimes I want to finish or try to finish them later on, or I DNF them because I'm not in the mood. But I know I will probably like them if I try them again later. I did not do that with this book. However, I will keep it on hold for a little bit. Maybe I want to finish it later, but I don't think so. I gave it a 2-star rating based on what I read, which is over 50%. And I don't think it will improve a lot, and even if it does improve, like, the writing is still just mediocre at best. So if you want to try it, I say give it a shot. It's very popular. I definitely have an unpopular opinion, but I just thought this book was not good. I would be better off saying I gave this book a general 5 out of 10. And for me that is a 2-star rating, not a 3-star rating. A 3-star rating would be a 5.5 or up. So this is my wrap up for now. I'd say thank you for watching and on to de keer.